This week on Jerusalem Dateline, we head to Israel's northern border on Mount Hermon, called the Eyes of the Country, to see the growing threats facing the Jewish state. Plus, how the refugee crisis is fueling anti-Semitism and affecting European Jews.
I'm seriously asking the question if I can stay here and if there's a future for my children here.
And a new campaign is mobilizing support for persecuted Christians in the Middle East. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. The civil war in Syria is now 5 years and counting. It's resulted in the deaths of thousands, a refugee crisis, and sent shockwaves through the Middle East. That includes Israel's strategic Golan Heights. We went to Israel's northern border to report on the new challenges and dangers facing the Jewish state. The borders of Syria and Israel merge on the heights of Mount Hermon. Major Nati Aharon is a company commander on Mount Hermon. We can't show you the Israeli bases for security reasons, but the mountain is called the Eyes of the Country, since from its commanding vantage point, you can see all the way to Damascus.
Our eyes see all that's happening on the eastern side. We're checking everything that's happening there, and sadly, we see all the fighting. We need to be high enough so it's possible to see in the distance during the day and the night.
That fighting has changed Israel's border.
From the Israeli point of view, a year and a half ago, we have a dramatic change along the border when Al-Qaeda groups took over and actually control Quneitra Gate and control the 50 miles of the Syrian border.
And as retired IDF colonel and security expert Kobi Marone points out, in addition to Al-Qaeda, attention must be focused on Iran and Hezbollah.
The second thing from the Israeli point of view, Iran is about 1,000 miles away from here, but the chaos in Syria gave the Iranian regime a great opportunity to try to create in the northern part of the Golan Heights a real threat against Israel on the ground.
These recent satellite images released by Stratfor Intelligence demonstrate how Iran's proxy Hezbollah has built a fortified base inside Syria. Some expect it could be used as a missile base to strike Israel. In nearby Lebanon, they already have 100,000 missiles aimed at Israel.
It's part of the strategy that there is a chaos in Syria right now. And if they decided to retaliate to any Israeli attack, they can do it in Syria, which is not a country anymore. That's why they keep the Lebanese border very quiet. And if they decided to retaliate, they're doing it from the Syrian territory. That's why they build those new bases right now.
And Russia has also seen an opportunity in the Syrian civil war.
Since the withdrawal from Iraq in 2012, we see a clear decline of the American strategy over the Middle East, and the Russians use it very well. They are all over. I don't see American troops on the ground in the near future, and the Russian knows it, and that's why they not just keep their interest, they become the key player, and they actually, unfortunately, use the American weakness all over the Middle East.
In the meantime, Aharon and his company will keep watch on Israel's border.
First of all, we're very proud. It's a big privilege to be a commander and serve the people of this country. Everybody does their part. It's a long commitment, but it's worth it.
From the heights of Mount Hermon to the cities and towns of Europe, the massive influx of refugees from Muslim countries is fueling an old problem there, anti-Semitism. And that's driving Jewish communities to consider their options. CBN News Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has that story.
For the Jewish community, the refugee crisis is a huge problem.
According to Israeli author Manfred Gerstenfeld, that's because most are Muslims, a group behind some of the most extreme hate crimes in Europe.
Many of them are anti-Semites from the most anti-Semitic countries in the world.
Gerstenfeld blames what he calls massive non-selective immigration from Muslim countries. And with the new influx of refugees from the Middle East, it's getting worse.
You bring them in, you don't register them properly, you don't know whether terrorists come them who sees Jews as a target. So for the Jews, it is a very major problem.
Following last year's terror attacks in Copenhagen, one of them outside a synagogue, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made headlines by urging European Jews to come home to Israel. Thousands accepted the offer, and immigration from Europe to Israel spiked over the last 2 years. But Gerstenfeld tells CBN News it's not practical for everyone.
Elites consider leaving. They send their children. But the people who know only French, what can they do? They have to sit out their life till their pensions. Then they may come to Israel, unless they start burning synagogues.
Now the attack in Brussels is causing Belgian Jews to consider their options.
I'm seriously asking the question if I can stay here and if there's a future for my children here.
Nevertheless, Belgian Jew Patricia Teitelbaum said the decision isn't easy.
We're always speaking about it. Should we leave? Should we stay? Above all, we are also Belgians, so we are used to compromise. We are still hesitating, probably more than the French Jews, because they are leaving in much higher percentage. But definitely we ask ourselves the question, yeah.
Even in the midst of those questions, Teitelbaum is clear on one subject. She sees this as a warning for the West, because when attacks happen against Jews, it's only the beginning of trouble for everyone else. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
There's a saying that what begins with the Jews never ends with the Jews. It's all part of the warning out of Europe, but not just Europe. As John Wagi explains from Los Angeles, Israel's enemies number in the millions worldwide, but not all of them have guns and suicide vests. An economic and cultural war is another threat, and the battlefield is the college campuses, courts, and even churches.
When Jerusalem Mayor Nir Barkat tried to address a group of students at San Francisco State last week, he was shouted down by members of the anti-Israel BDS movement. It stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, and it's a powerful coalition of groups waging an economic and cultural war against Israel.
This Stand With Us conference in Los Angeles is an effort to counter the BDS movement, to fight the deluge of anti-Israel hostility on college campuses and social media and in the global economy.
Shir, an Israeli student, was shouted down and called a war criminal while she was speaking at a university in Tampa.
They waited outside of the class, and we had to have a police escort to our cars because they kept following us and calling us names. How can you sleep at night? You are a murderer.
It really hurts. As you can see, I'm standing here. I'm a civilized human being. I'm not a war machine.
Alon is a former Israeli soldier. He says he's constantly challenged by rumors and half-truths about Israel by his foreign friends on social media. He was also shouted down on campus by BDS supporters.
Standing up, shouting, screaming, and not even having an open discussion, just throwing out comments in the air without any open dialogue.
No, it's freedom of speech for me, but not for thee. That is what is the mantra of the BDS supporters on college campuses.
San Diego attorney Mika Danzig does pro bono work for people threatened by the BDS movement. He's angered that the freest society in the Middle East is singled out with the help of serial human rights abusers in the rest of the world.
And you're saying the one Jewish state is so deserving of this, then you uniquely attribute all this evil to the one Jewish state. That can't help but spill over to Jews on campus. It can't help but spill over to Jewish businesses, to people who are supportive of Israel, to Zionists, non-Jewish Zionists, Christian Zionists who support Israel. They become the focus of this vitriol and hate, not just Israel.
Several mainline Protestant churches are involved in the BDS economic war on Israel. The push began in the United Nations, targeting Israel for divestment in the same way churches targeted apartheid South Africa in the 1980s. Stand With Us CEO Roz Rothstein says some church leaders have bought into a campaign of disinformation that distorts the true picture in the Middle East.
Because oftentimes it's not the people in the pews that are angry at Israel. It's the people in leadership positions that are moving in this direction and on false information, on half-truths.
Rothstein says she's thankful for the millions of Christians who do support Israel.
I'm a daughter of Holocaust survivors, and I am personally grateful to the community for standing shoulder to shoulder with the State of Israel and Jewish people on these very difficult issues during these BDS campaigns. So thank you.
John Wagi, CBN News, Los Angeles.
Up next, a new campaign to raise awareness of the plight of persecuted Christians throughout the Middle East. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. Recently, Christian World News host Mark Martin interviewed Jason Peters from Voice of the Martyrs on a new campaign designed to raise awareness of Christian persecution throughout the Middle East.
The Voice of the Martyrs is a group that stands up for persecuted Christians, and Dr. Jason Peters is Associate Vice President for the VOM, and he joins us now with more. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate your time today. Now, you've ministered to persecuted Christians in 40 countries. Why is persecution getting worse, Jason?
Well, it's a good question. I think that Jesus promised that if we faithfully followed him, we would face persecution. And we're seeing that manifest largely because of the growth of Islamic extremists, which is really targeting Christians.
Where have you seen the greatest suffering?
Personally, I would have to say Sudan. Sudan has been one of the most difficult places to be a Christian in recent years. And most recently, it's been Syria and Iraq.
Well, VOM is sponsoring a new movement called I Am In. What is this all about?
Well, when Islamic militants came into Mosul, which was a part of the Nineveh plain, I mean, this was the biblical city of Nineveh. Christians have been there for many hundreds of years. ISIS came in and they started to spray paint things on people's home. And what it was the Arabic letter Nun, which is the way that Christians are identified in the Quran. It's the first letter of the word, which comes from Nazarene, Nazrani. So as this was spray painted on their houses, they had a few choices. They could either convert to Islam, they could pay this exorbitant jizya tax, which is like selling yourself into slavery. They could leave, or they would be killed.
Well, I know VOM has a new book out called I Am Noon. It looks like I Am In, but it's actually I Am Noon. And it's a collection of stories from Christians who have faced persecution from ISIS and other Islamic extremists. Briefly share a story from the book that inspires you.
Yeah, one of the most amazing stories is the story of a 13-year-old boy named Danjuma. And he was in northern Iraq, and he was attacked by Islamic extremists. They came into his village. They killed 23 Christians that night. With him, they hit him in the head with a machete. They tried to cut off his left arm. They ended up actually, believe it or not, cutting off his genitals. Just really harassing, oppressive kind of things. And now he's blind. But in spite of all that, you can read in the book how he says, even though they did this to me, God is in control and I trust him. And by the way, I forgive those men who did this to me because Jesus has forgiven me.
Well, why is persecution not necessarily a bad thing, would you say?
Well, because it provides a purification of the church. Persecution works to refine our faith. It works to challenge us to say, what do I really believe? Because if it's not tested, it's kind of hard for me to demonstrate that it's true.
Well, what can our viewers do to make a difference? People want to help.
They do. And one of the first things that persecuted Christians ask us for is we're sitting in a tent of a refugee, sipping tea and talking about it. I will ask them, how can we help you? The first thing they say is pray. Pray for us. And they'll mention occasionally that they're praying for us as well, because they say, we know that you're facing challenges. But to pray, though, you've got to know your family. And I like to think of it as brothers and sisters. Secondly, we provide practical ways to help. So people go to persecution.com. They can sign up for a magazine which tells them how they can help. Also, they find out ways they can practically provide assistance like family med packs.
Well, Dr. Jason Peters from the Voice of the Martyrs, thanks again for being with us today. And we want to mention that your book, of course, from Voice of the Martyrs called I Am Noon. It is inspiring stories of Christians facing Islamic extremists, and it can be found at Christian bookstores and at Amazon.com, correct?
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Coming up, 2 Christian leaders speak out about their visit to Israel and standing with the Jewish state during this critical time. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. Recently, I sat down with Ken Barron, the Chief of Staff of Franklin Graham, and Ken Isaacs, the man responsible for international outreach of Samaritan's Purse, from the studios of TBN overlooking Jerusalem. Well, Ken Isaacs and Ken Barron, it's a real privilege to be with you here on Jerusalem Dateline. Can you tell me about your experiences so far in Israel? Ken, what has it been like? What have you seen and heard here?
We've just met some tremendous people during our time here. Our purpose was to come and dedicate 2 ambulances to Magen David Adom on behalf of Samaritan's Purse and the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. And it's just been a tremendous opportunity to see, obviously, what the country is going through, and it's such a hotbed of the world. And then seeing what's happening in the U.S. and interest in everything that we're doing and what's going on here.
And what kind of response have you had for the gifts you've been giving?
It's a great welcoming, and much different than it used to be, I think, because people have warmed and know that, in the words of Prime Minister Netanyahu, that evangelical Christians are Israel's best friend.
Ken, you're the head of Samaritan's Purse humanitarian outreach around the world. What have been your impressions here?
To have the opportunity to interface with MDA when we donated the ambulances, that opened up more doors for us to see what they're doing in emergency medical response around the world. The Israeli Defense Forces, the Israeli government, are known internationally. For example, Haiti, they set up a hospital down there, Nepal, many different areas, and I've run into them in my career over the years. So I just wanted to take advantage of that opportunity to meet with some of their leaders and understand how they plan, how they think, how they train, how they sort of do their supply line management. And it's a fascinating program that they have, and I think that we have a lot that we can learn from them.
You were talking earlier about this underground hospital. What was that like?
It's absolutely incredible. It's up in Rambam, and they have built a 2,000-bed facility underground, about 18 and a half meters underground, and it looks like a parking garage. But it's got blast doors in it. It's absolutely incredible. But just to see how they have thought through and planned, engineered, and they've done all of this while they've had this huge hospital above them, maintaining all of its work, and they've dug out under it and built this incredible thing under it. It's quite a feat.
Going around, Ken, can you speak to the sort of the threats, the unique threats that Israel faces, and why it's so important, to be standing with Israel for such a time as this?
Well, I think obviously the Bible tells us that this is God's land that He gave to Abraham, and for us that's very, very important to know that that lineage continues all the way through our lives. The threats, I was down in Gaza a couple of years ago and actually held them, spent rockets in my hand, and people carry on business, and the bus stops are air raid shelters, so as soon as the sirens go off, they've got a few seconds to get places. But now the attacks have become closer and more intimate through attacks on people, many that we don't hear about in the States, through knife attacks by just Muslims that decide they're going to attack some Jewish people, and yet you don't experience a fear here. You feel a sense of home here, and that's just one of the things that people live with.
Yeah, Ken, what are some of your impressions and maybe the message you're going to be taking back to the States or wherever you're going to be going next?
We had dinner last night with a Palestinian Arab Christian family in Nazareth, and they were talking about that tourism had fallen down. They were talking about Christians are leaving the area, and what a shame it was for this to happen in the place where Jesus spent most of His life. I would encourage people not only to come here from a tourist trip or sense, but also to recognize that this is a holy land and there's a huge struggle. It is the center of the world. Christians have to stand strong. If we don't stand for what we believe in, we will be marginalized and pushed off of the paper of society, and I don't think that is what we're called to do.
Well, Ken, thanks so much for being with us.
Can't ask for a better studio than
that.
No, this
not
is
at
awesome.
all. Coming up, how matzah made in Israel makes its way around the world.
We are exporting to over 35 countries.
When we come back. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. Every year, Jewish people around the world celebrate the Exodus from Egypt with a Passover Seder. This year it begins on April 22nd. One of the key elements is unleavened bread or matzah. If a whole country eats matzah for a week, that's a lot of matzah. Not only that, but they export too, and nearly 60% of the exports go to the U.S. Here's a look at how they make matzah in Israel. The Bible calls it the bread of affliction, unleavened bread or matzah. Every year, the Jewish people are commanded to retell the story of their exodus from Egypt and to eat unleavened bread for 7 days.
Because the Lord made them live very fast, they had to make bread that didn't have time to rise, and they ate this flatbread, which is matzah.
Roy Wolf is vice president of Matzot Aviv. He told CBN News the whole process, from mixing to rolling to shaping to baking, must be finished in 18 minutes, because the moment water touches the flour, it starts rising.
And the whole process takes no longer than 3-4 minutes. But every 15 minutes, in order to avoid to have any leftovers of leavened dough, we have to clean the mixer system.
Wolf is the 6th generation to work in his family's business, which started in 1887. They've been in the current factory since 1946.
In the basements here where we have the flour silos today, the Haganah, the first defense forces, used to hide the weapons from the British mandate. Since 1946 we've been here making matzah. Of course, the factory was refurbished several times.
At Matzot Aviv, they make about 20 tons of matzah per day. They start in October and work around the clock for the last month, except on the Sabbath, to provide matzah to Jewish communities in Israel and around the world.
We are exporting to over 35 countries, to all Jewish communities around the world. From the large communities in North America to even the smallest community. There's one person that's in Wallis Island. He's the doctor of the island, and we are sending him matzah every year. And so he will be able to have a seder with matzah from Israel. But we also have Christian communities buying matzah in countries like Korea and Singapore, where it's, I've been told that in some churches it's been used as the holy bread.
The Last Supper would have been a Passover Seder with unleavened bread. Because of that, many Christians like to take communion with matzah. Some even say that the design of the matzah, striped and pierced, is symbolic of the Messiah himself. You might think with all this matzah making that the Wolf family would get tired of Passover, but not so.
We're waiting for this Seder. We usually come very tired to the Seder because I'm working until the same day in the afternoon. But it means a lot. This holiday, of course, means a lot to us.
One Israeli compared matzah to a data drive, passing along information from generation to generation. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And for all our Jewish friends, Hak Pesach Sameach. That's Happy Passover. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.